4 months ago, Immigration Minister Mark Miller announced that Ottawa would reduce the cap on international student visas by an additional 10%.
But let's set the table further a little. When you look at the growth that we have seen in people that are temporary residents of Canada, that's something that has grown almost exponentially over the last few years, from about 437,000 individuals in 2019 alone to about 1.2 million in 2023. That comes with consequences, but let's not also forget the importance that immigration generally, the importance of people that are here on a temporary basis has done for the economy. The Bank of Canada has said it, the International Monetary Fund has said it, the immigration writ large has been in part responsible for preventing us from going into a recession, has been important for the net growth in the gross domestic product. Again, this has been important, and it's been important to the growth of the country, but I think it's safe to admit that we have allowed certain aspects of this to get overheated, and probably for too long.
On one side of the debate, supporters of the move argue that the large number of international students in Canada puts upward pressure on rents and that the system has been a gateway for fraud, with many international students arriving in Canada and claiming asylum or simply not intending to leave. However, on the other side of the debate, others have argued that international students provide a tremendous amount of value to the Canadian economy, to Canadian educational institutions, and that those institutions depend on international students as a revenue stream. Joining me now to discuss this debate is Sheldon Levy, former president and vice-chancellor of Toronto Metropolitan University. Mr. Levy, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, as a former president of a university, what do you make of the argument that Canada is not benefiting from international students and that the costs associated are not worth the benefits?
Well, I don't hear the argument that the country isn't benefiting from international students. I even think the minister in his piece mentioned the benefit. I think the question was, did it get overheated, get it too large, and what were the consequences? But there is no doubt that the country benefited and the universities and the colleges benefit from international students.
Now, I want to stay with the critics. Are there educational institutions that are abusing the system, and how can that be fixed?
Well, there's no doubt that there are some that took advantage of the growth, but I know that they are in a vast minority, and therefore we shouldn't begin to see this as the only problem. But you fix it by better controls on the intake of the students. And I'll give you one good example of it. You have students that want to come to the country for education and then return to their home country after education. And there are students that want to come into Canada and after their studies get a postgraduate work permit and perhaps move to become a landed immigrant and maybe a citizen of the country. Well, those are two different streams. When it comes to the first stream, students should be open to all programs because they don't intend to stay. But for students that are tending to stay and looking for careers, for their benefit and the country's benefit, they should be far more aligned to the jobs available and the jobs in the future, and therefore more aligned to the economy. But the third thing we have to be careful about is never to turn our back on the best and the brightest. Every country is competing for the best minds in the world, and to have a cap on those students that come into graduate programs as the best and the brightest is not a good policy.
Now, you mentioned the economic benefits of these students. How does that compare to other major aspects of the Canadian economy?
Well, let me give you a few comparators. If you look at the Government of Canada's data, that in 2022, there was $38 billion brought in by international students, and this includes all aspects from food, shelter, tuition, and families visiting. The whole economic impact was roughly 32 billion. That grew before the changes by IRCC to around 50 billion. That is larger than all of forestry. That is larger than all of aerospace. That is roughly two-thirds all of auto. So it is a very, very large sector of our economy. And to lose a significant portion of it is to lose 20, $25 billion. And the impact, because students are in first, second, third, and fourth year, that impact is not felt for a number of years. But you can't lose that amount of money without feeling the impact in Canada.
And there have been some very high profile examples over the last month of colleges closing down programs or even entire departments because of the international student cap. Do you think schools became too dependent on international students and their higher tuition that they pay?
Oh, absolutely. The if you look in Ontario and you look that there have been no base grant increases for many, many years, and tuition is frozen. And but inflation continues, compensation continues to grow. The colleges and universities look for new revenue sources, and international students was there. And it was there in year one, year two, year three, and it kept on growing. But absolutely, you're right. It was far too dependent on international tuition fees.
And some would argue that part of the problem in terms of that dependence is the difference between tuition for a Canadian citizen and tuition for an international student. Do you think that the price difference has fueled that problem?
Well, when you look at the price for domestic students or Canadian citizens, they are coupled with an amount that the province pays, so that the revenue the institution receives is the tuition fee and the government grant. But when an international student comes, there is no corresponding government grant, so the student has to pay the full price, and therefore there's going to be a significant differential. And then the universities and the colleges are going to price it by what the market will bear and what is their competitive advantage, because they're looking for not only the students, but they're looking to ensure the students have a great education, but they do need the profit from it to be able to cover some of their costs.
And you were a former deputy minister in the province. What can or should the province do to maximize the benefits of international students?
Well, a lot of the responsibility begins with the federal government as well. But if one of the things that the provinces can do is if they fund the institutions or allow domestic fee increases, domestic fees to increase, there's going to take a lot less pressure off the institutions and the need for international education. But at the federal level, I think there has to be a much more strategic alignment between the economic needs of the country and the number of students. And as I said, for students that are planning to come to the country but have no interest in uh, having a postgraduate work permit, that it should be a much more open process for the colleges and universities.
And how important is it to realign our international student program with such an uncertain economic future ahead of us?
Well, we have a number of challenges. One of them that no one has been speaking much about, but it's critical, is the birth rate or the demographic profile of the country. You have a country with many, many people at my age, call it the baby boomers, growing. But in order to be able to support that growth, you need a large group of people in the working group. And no different than South Korea, Italy, Germany, Canada, our birth rates do not meet the population needs we need, and therefore immigration is not only important to our country, it is going to become very, very competitive. And if we gain the reputation of turning away young people from our country, then they're going to be wanted by other countries that have the same challenge. And we can't simply turn on and turn off immigration of international students as if it's a faucet. So we have to be always prepared to be welcoming of a country and to put our best foot forward to encourage the best students in the world to want to come to Canada. Our birth rate is 1.26, which means that we are a declining population without immigration. And what better immigration is there than having international students that study here, learn, make sure they have a good understanding of the language, both English and French, and are in programs that make a difference to the economy, and at the same time meet their educational and aspirational needs. So one thing everyone has to do is make sure the world knows that Canada is a welcoming place for international students.
Mr. Levy, thank you so much for the time today.
Thank you for asking me.